juniper tree or a snake bush. Got a story. Last Monday night, I was going to go see a new film that has just been made called The Return of the Horse, and my neighbor wanted to go too, and her car had been taken off to the garage, and so I got down to her house, and she said, "There's something out in the backyard that it scares me." And right there by their hot tub was a prairie rattler coiled. And I've dealt with prairie rattlers in the past, and they're really beautiful creatures, among the most beautiful creatures, but you got to be careful. So what I did, this is what I suggest strongly, is I got a shovel and a Coleman ice chest, and I very gently got the rattler, who was hissing and rattling away, on the shovel and put it in the Coleman ice chest and closed the lid, stuck it in my car and hauled it down the road about 10 miles to a really empty ranch and released it down there because he didn't want to hurt it. And it said so long, and that was that. It's cool. But it's good to do that. It's to become that conscious of other forms of life and their imperative, the fact that they have every right to be here and to respect that, and to not try to go up and touch them or anything like that, but to get close enough to them so that over a period of time you can get your heads to meet. There's nothing like getting your head into the reptilian brain or allowing the reptilian mind into your own. It's really cool. It really is. You ought to try it. Yes.
Having lived in the desert for so long and been a part of the nature for so long, what is the saddest thing that you've watched disappear, or the most traumatic experience that you've had due to the increase of lack of water in New Mexico?
Well, this is sort of a bigger context question, because it's probably the saddest thing. In 1970, at the request of Hopi Indians, I started what they called the Black Mesa Defense Fund, which became one of the first hardcore radical environmental groups, because it was the first. It in part became the basis for the Monkey Wrench Canyon novel. But the upshot was that, and I think I mentioned this to you the last time, that the idea of getting water from the Colorado River over into the central valleys of Arizona, ostensibly for agriculture, resulted in what was called the Central Arizona Project. And the idea to pump water, to get the juice, the electricity to pump water from the Colorado River down at Lake Havasu into the central valleys of Arizona, was to put dams at either end of the Grand Canyon. And friends like David Brower and Martin Litton shot that down back in the 50s. But a source of power had to be discovered. And so the source of power was this huge coal deposit in the middle of Navajo Hopi country, Black Mesa. And it's a sacred mesa. It's sacred to both tribes, very sacred. And the idea was that the Peabody Coal Company, which has happened, would come in and mine the coal, take the coal via railroad up to the newly constructed Navajo generating station up by what my buddy Ed Abbey called Lake Powell, and create the electricity to go down through the power lines all the way to the banks of Lake Havasu and pump the water out of Lake Havasu 300 and some miles, well, 200 and some to Phoenix, and then another 50 or 60 over to Tucson. And none of it was used for agriculture. It was the original intent, or very little of it, because the farmers couldn't afford the water, so they sold out to developers. But the saddest thing I saw was up on Black Mesa when a bulldozer bulldozed a Hogan, or a Navajo home where this woman had lived for 70 years. Bulldozed it to the ground, and I watched her faint dead away. And that was pretty sad. Her whole life disappeared in front of a bulldozer. And that had to do with water, and boy, that made me mad. And I'm not at liberty to speak about some of the things that you get into under conditions like that. Sure was a profound moment for me, though. And I think one of the things I'd like to say, when I think about this, one of the neat things about being in your age zone and involved in sort of a bohemian perspective with regard to how you want to comport yourselves, at least for the next foreseeable future, is to think about the history of the counterculture movement in America. Literarily, it had its, well, a lot of different places. Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, but in the 1920s and 30s in Paris, there was the whole sense of bohemian perspective that resulted in what they called the lost generation. And immediately after the Second World War came a huge countercultural surge in the United States of America, referred to now as the Beat Generation. And the way the Beat Generation affected the whole countercultural perspective throughout the 60s and 70s resulted in an understanding that culture as we live it in the status quo takes an enormous toll on the habitat, a disproportionately large toll on habitat, which includes the water. And that's why one of my favorite apophthegms is coined by Walt Whitman is resist much, obey little. Because you have to question it all. You have to question a political system that's fiscally dominated by the corporate will. You have to resist a bureaucracy designed to defend procedure as defined by the corporate will and its political entities. You really do have to really confront all of that with extraordinary intelligence and strength of character to determine what you really sense is ethically, aesthetically, consciously correct, and vigorously resist that which isn't. And that's the bottom line in thinking like a watershed right there.
That's great. It's a good place to end, actually.
Okay, adios.